Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternities, a perfect episode number 3, Tape 6, Side A, 13 Reasons Why. This video is a part of a series of videos where I analyze an episode from one of my favorite shows that I think is near perfect. These episodes aren't necessarily my favorite episodes of all time, but are episodes that I feel should be celebrated and that I would like to analyze and dive deeper into. These episodes are presented in no particular order, as they are all episodes that I think are spectacular. In this video, I look at episode 11 from season 1 of 13 Reasons Why, tape 6, side A. So I have to start with a spoiler warning for all of season 1 of 13 Reasons Why. If you have not seen this season in its entirety, you will not want to watch this video. Otherwise, some things may be spoiled for you. So 13 Reasons Why was a bit of a controversial show. It was extremely popular when it first was released, but then received a sizable backlash with people unhappy with the show. Many have claimed that the show glamorizes suicide, and those claims, quite frankly, are factually incorrect. It is simply a false reading of the material, much in the same way if someone claimed that the film Schindler's List glorified and supported Nazi Germany. It's simply a false interpretation that holds no merit. And from what I can gather, this claim is mostly made by people who haven't watched the show or otherwise made up their minds before watching the show and thus had confirmation bias. In fact, 13 Reasons Why makes a strong statement against suicide, and it portrays the suicide of its main protagonist, Hannah Baker, as an absolutely tragic occurrence that should have been avoided at all costs. Now, some claim the show glorifies suicide because its premise is the suicide victim records a series of audio tapes aimed at 13 people whom she feels contributed to wanting to kill herself. Thus, the claim is made that the show somehow presents this act of revenge as cool and her suicide as a great way to get back at those who hurt her, which might inspire others to kill themselves to do the same. Again, this is an objectively false read of the material, as it is clear the premise isn't meant to glorify or justify what she did. Rather, it's meant to elicit sympathy for the pain that she was suffering, and thus, clearly the message isn't, hey, isn't it cool to kill yourself? But rather, we should be more compassionate to those around us because we don't know how they may be suffering. Which is in fact the conclusion drawn at the end of season 1. And the event of her suicide is clearly portrayed as a massively negative and tragic occurrence that has strong negative repercussions for all who knew her. And quite frankly, I am slightly offended by this interpretation, as I feel it contributes to a culture of victim blaming of those who commit suicide rather than trying to help, understand, and show sympathy for those suffering from depression and suicidal thoughts, as that is the real premise of the show. However, the show 13 Reasons Why ran for 4 seasons, but it is my very strong opinion that only the first season is worth watching, and that the show should have actually ended after season 1, and that the other seasons are not only of poor quality, but they overall hurt the quality of the show. However, I still hold season 1 in very high regard, and it is due mostly to this episode. Season 1 really resonated with me in a way other teen dramas never have. It felt more true to my difficult experience in high school than any other material I've seen before. And it's not because the events of the characters depicted in the show were very similar to my experiences, but because they weren't. It more had to do with the essential themes and particular emotional circumstances that the show touched on. For example, the theme of regret and the strong desire that you should have acted differently than you did, or the desire that things had occurred differently than they did. And also the presentation of what it's like to be socially inept, or how teenagers are not experienced or developed enough to deal with the complexities of some social interactions, particularly romantic encounters. For me, the show really hit these notes in a way that seems realistic and relatable to my own experiences, whereas most films seem really Hollywoodified and unrealistic of what it's actually like to be a teenager or to be in high school. Many attempts are done to make the movie or show seem more fun or entertaining. In fact, I would say that there hasn't been a piece of high school drama that I felt was as realistic and spoke to my experience of being a teenager since the film Pump Up the Volume, which was released all the way back in 1990. In particular, these two pieces speak more to those more socially awkward or uncertain of how to handle social interactions, which in this case is seen through the eyes of the protagonist, Clay Jensen. Something that is specifically explored in this episode, as this is the episode that explores his backstory. So, getting more into this episode in particular, this is the 11th episode of Season 1, which contains 13 episodes. Each episode follows a different tape that tells the story of a particular student whom Hannah knew that somehow affected her decision to kill herself. At the start of the season, Hannah stated that she made 13 tapes, and each tape was about a person who was a reason why she wanted to kill herself. And each episode tells the story of that person. During the course of the show, we follow Clay as he listens to these tapes. Clay cared about Hannah very much and was really affected by her suicide. Clay seems to be nothing but nice and caring to Hannah, so it made the viewer wonder why Clay was on this list. What could he have been done to be included in these 13 reasons why she killed herself? And as I was watching the show, I had assumed that they were saving Clay's tape for the final episode, but it turned out they instead showed it in the third to last episode of the season, which was a bold choice that I liked, as they didn't save his story for last, that there were 2 more chapters left after his story. It made it all the more powerful. So this episode begins with narration from Hannah as Clay listens to the 11th tape. He describes a party at Jessica's house. Now, the 2 previous tapes were also about the same party, focusing on 2 other instances. One where she witnessed Jessica being raped by Jessica's boyfriend's best friend, Bryce, and the other where she witnessed her friend Sherry run over a stop sign while drunk, and Sherry refused to report it because she was worried about getting in trouble, but as a result of the stop sign not being there, Jeff, who was Clay's best friend, died in a car accident. However, during both of these recountings, she skipped over certain events as a story she was saving for another time. So now she says it's time to tell that story that she's been saving, and that it's all about Clay. Now we see Clay listening to this tape while he's out with Tony, who is a sort of caretaker of the tapes. Clay starts to freak out and asks Tony how he can listen to this tape, and Tony says that the asshole answer is that he puts the tape in and presses play. Clay agrees that that is the asshole answer, but Tony responds that it's true. Now, this scene is a great way to begin the episode. First off, the music is great as it is building tension. It has a feeling like it's building to something like powerful to happen, which is essentially the case with this episode. As Clay has listened to 10 tapes about other people, the whole time wondering what he did wrong, and now finally he gets to find out, but he's too scared to listen. It's a very relatable and powerful fear. So in flashbacks, we see Hannah and Clay outside the movie theater where they work together, having the same cheerful banter that they always have. While in narration, Hannah tells Clay that he's probably wondering why he's on the tapes and what he could have possibly done at Jessica's party. So this does a good job at building tension as to the mystery of what happened, but also it makes more sense later on why she said this. In visuals, we see Clay at home preparing for the party while he puts on way too much cologne, and his mother fusses over what he should wear, showing that he's nervous and a bit socially inept. However, this is juxtaposed nicely with Hannah's narration, where she tells Clay that she always admired him for his lack of fear, to be who he wanted to be, regardless of what others thought of him. She said she envied that because she always cared too much about what other people thought of her. We then see him show up for Jessica's party 5 minutes early, which makes him look odd, as is actually a custom to show up several hours late to a party, which is a custom I remember well. But Jessica invites him in to help set up and notice that he put on way too much cologne. Again, it signifies how nervous and socially inept Clay is. While in narration, Hannah explains the only reason she went to the party was for Clay. But in retrospect, she wishes that she never went, and she bets that Clay feels the same way. So Clay, he's at the party talking to a few people when Hannah finally arrives. Clay freaks out, excuses himself, and starts to leave, obviously being too scared and nervous at the prospect of actually approaching Hannah in this kind of setting. However, before he can leave, Jeff catches him. Now, Jeff is a baseball player who is a lot more experienced than Clay in social interactions, particularly with girls. Clay has been tutoring Jeff to get his grades up, and in return, Jeff has been helping him be more social. When he sees Clay starting to leave, he tells him that Hannah has arrived. Clay pretends not to care and proceeds to leave, but Jeff insists he go in and talk to her. After Clay tries to make a bunch of excuses, Jeff finally resorts to threatening to kick his ass unless he goes in and talks to Hannah, so he does. He finds her sitting alone on a couch and begins to have a normal bantery conversation like the ones they have at work. Hannah brings up that he promised her a drink and a ride on his bike, which he says he will do. He goes off to get her a drink, but then comes back to say that actually he did bring his bike. Hannah acts disappointed, but then heads off with Clay to retrieve the drinks. In narration, Hannah explains how nervous she was and that Clay made it seem so easy. At this point, we flash back to the present where Clay removes his headphones as he's shocked to hear her say that he made it seem easy. He explains to Tony that he was shitting himself and then asks why she's not telling the truth. Tony explains that she is telling her truth. Clay asks why he needs to be with them as he listens to the tape, and Tony answers that he doesn't know what Clay's truth is or how he'll react when he hears Hannah's. So even though the tape narration is solely from Hannah's perspective, we the audience are shown flashbacks from Clay's perspective as we see him before Hannah arrives and how nervous he was and that he was so scared he tried to leave, but Jeff forced him to stay, even though this kind of contradicts the tape telling the narrative through Hannah's perspective of storytelling that they've done in previous episodes. But I really like this as it juxtaposes the differences between how Clay and Hannah remember things, and that Hannah was so preoccupied with being nervous that she didn't notice how nervous he was, and that to her he appeared to be confident and at ease. But even in the scenes with Hannah, it's obvious how nervous Clay is, but it goes to show how one can get preoccupied with their own concerns. They don't notice the clear concern of others. And I love how the show draws attention to this when Tony brings up that Clay's truth is different than Hannah's. It also proves how powerful This is for Clay to be getting Hannah's perspective on events that he remembers, but seeing that she remembered them differently. In the present, Clay gets a phone call from his mother, who is acting as the school's attorney in the lawsuit Hannah's parents are making against the school. She calls to check up on him, but when he asks about the case, she says that she can't talk about it. Then we cut to the principal of the school telling the school counselor, Mr. Porter, that Hannah's parents rejected their offer of a plea deal, and some students and faculty will have to give depositions in the case. Mr. Porter seems concerned for the students' well-being, as having to testify may put undue stress on them. However, we learn in a later episode that Mr. Porter is actually more concerned about the encounter he had with Hannah coming out, as she came to him for help and he wasn't helpful enough. The principal brings up how there was a graffiti aimed at taunting Hannah that the school painted over, and how their lawyer says that it could be construed as destroying evidence, and that he doesn't want the school to be taken down because of what one disturbed sophomore decided to spray paint on a bathroom wall. He also vows to protect the staff, stating that they did nothing wrong. Now, on one hand, this is commendable, as he wants the school to continue to operate to help other kids, and he doesn't want any of his staff to lose their jobs over this. But, on the other hand, he's kind of downplaying the harassment that Hannah Baker went through, which was kind of the problem in the first place. So instead of trying to face and correct their mistakes, they want to ignore them, which would only cause them harm again. So it shows that their hearts are in the right place, but they're not really going about it in the right way. So going back to Clay and Hannah at the party, they're standing in the kitchen talking. Clay is talking about superpowers that he made up. Hannah then asks him if he had a superpower right now, what would he want to do? Clay answers that he'd make everyone else disappear. So Hannah asks then what would they do? But before he can answer, someone interrupts them by exploding beer all over Hannah, so Clay and Hannah move outside and sit on lounge chairs. There, Hannah asks him about Jeff and why he seems to be looking over at them a lot. Clay answers that he's taken an interest in his social life. So Hannah asks that Clay tutors him in school, and then Jeff tutors Clay in what? And Clay answers girls, and she seems kind of disappointed with the answer, so then Clay clarifies by saying girl, singular, and she smiles widely at that, and it looks like they're making a connection when they're interrupted by a drunk kid insisting that the two of them play beer pong with him. Eventually, Jeff comes over and carries the drunk boy away, and Clay asks if they want to find somewhere more private to talk, so they go upstairs into an empty hallway. He takes her by the hand and leads her upstairs. There they have some more banter about the movie theater that they work at, until Hannah mentions that she's going to have to quit working there because her parents want her to work at their pharmacy to help them. She says it's a shame because she likes working there, and Clay says he does too, but then Hannah specifies that she likes working there because of him. And they connect, and it looks like they're going to move in and kiss. But he gets scared and backs away and makes a comment about how if she quits, at least she won't smell like dirty popcorn anymore. Just then, a couple comes out of one of the bedrooms, smiling, and goes downstairs. Clay checks out the empty room, and Hannah asks him if he wants to go in there to talk. But back in the present, Clay rips the headphones off his head and keeps saying stop. Tony asks if he wants him to stop the car, but Clay doesn't have an answer and just says that he needs to stop listening. He asks Tony if she says what happens next and why, and Tony confirms that she does. Clay then asks if Tyler, Zach, Justin, Jessica, Ryan, and all those that came before him heard this story, and Tony answers, of course. Clay, upset, mutters that he's just like everyone else. So the first part of the scene does an amazing job of showing the natural progression of Hannah and Clay, making it clear that Hannah has feelings for Clay, which of course he shares, but is too shy to act on. I like the reoccurring motif of when the two are about to kiss or connect, they get interrupted by someone drunk at the party. In fact, when Clay first tries to hold Hannah's hand, he is bumped by some drunk people who stop him. So each time they move to a place that's more and more private until it is Clay himself who stops them when they're about to kiss. So Hannah then suggests they go to the ultimate private place, a bedroom. It's a great scene that flows really well, and the actors do a great job with it. And the part where Clay realizes that everyone else on the tapes before listened to him in one of his most private and personal moments was a great role reversal. As Clay was always so quick to judge the others for the mistakes they made when Hannah described them in the tapes, but the shoe is on the other foot when he realizes they listened to his mistake as well. However, his statement about him being just like everyone else isn't entirely accurate, as he will find out later on. So, as Tony is driving Clay around, Clay announces that he doesn't feel well and he feels like he might throw up. And then he goes to try to listen to the tapes, but Tony stops him, saying that he needs to be in the right headspace to listen to the tapes. He then suggests that they go get some food. So he takes Clay to a cafe that a girl they know, Sky, works at. She brings them their food and asks Clay if he wants a coffee, but he says he'll just get a water. But when he goes to get up, Sky tells him to sit back down and that she'll get it. As soon as she leaves, Clay says that he wants to leave, that he just wants to go listen to the tapes, but Tony insists that they eat, saying that he needs to be in the right headspace. Clay asks him how he can be in the right headspace to find out why he caused the girl to kill herself. And just then Sky returns with his water and he downs it all in one gulp. Sky asks if he's had a rough night. Tony says that Clay's just working through some stuff. Clay insists that he's fine, but Sky tells him that he's avoiding a hard truth that he doesn't want to face. Clay looks up at her in surprise and says, and she says that its existential crisis is written on his forehead. When he asks how she could know that, she insists that she can see the future and offers to give him a card reading, to which he agrees to. As she's reading his cards, she says several harsh things and tells him that he's clinging to the past that he can't let go of. He asks her point blank if she's talking about Hannah, but she ignores him and keeps reading the cards. He asks why she's being so mean to him, why she's always so mean to him, as they used to be friends until she stopped talking to him, but she insists that he was the one that stopped talking to her. He tells her that she used to be nice, but she says that we can't all be nice girls like Sherry or Hannah. He then asks why she hates Hannah and says that she's just jealous of her, but Sky asks why she should be jealous of a dead girl, and then says what she did was stupid. Clay gets upset, tells her that she doesn't know anything about it. Sky says she knows that she didn't go through anything that anybody else didn't go through, and they all get through it. Clay then grabs her wrists to reveal cut marks all over it and asks her if that's how she gets through it. She says that it's what she does instead of killing herself, and then says suicide is for the weak. This pisses Clay off and he leaves. When he's in the car with Tony, he calls Sky a bitch, and Tony is shocked because he never heard Clay talk like that before. Clay explains that Sky doesn't know the first thing about what Hannah went through, and Tony retorts that he doesn't know what Sky is going through. He then tells Tony to stop acting like he's all wise and says he's like an unhelpful Yoda. He goes to listen to the tapes, but Tony stops him saying headspace, headspace. But Clay responds calling him unhelpful Yoda, unhelpful Yoda. Tony then tells him that he knows a nice spot to go to listen to the rest of the tapes. Sky is a somewhat interesting character, someone who's also suffering, but externalizes her pain instead of internalizing it like Hannah did. It shows how different people cope. And Tony's right, Clay doesn't know how Sky suffers and should take that into account. However, on the other hand, Sky was letting her anger and jealousy get the better of her, and she was, in fact, victim blaming Hannah and showing no sympathy on what she went through. I also love the unhelpful Yoda bit, as Tony has throughout the show acted kind of like a wise sage throughout the whole season, giving wise advice and saying all these catchphrases and like he knows everything and how to react. And I love how Clay calls him out on that. It's really cool. And in the finale of the season, we'll see that Tony isn't infallible and he owns up to making a mistake that he made in being so staunch about respecting Hannah's wishes regarding the tapes. So, Tony drives Clay to the top of a hill, which is a very scenic spot that overlooks the city. He says Clay can get out here, but he says he'd rather listen in the car, so Tony gets out of the car and tells Clay that he'll be right here if he needs him. So Clay continues to listen, so we jump back to the party where Clay and Hannah enter Jessica's bedroom. They see a collection of pet rocks that she has, and Hannah names one of them Stone. She then realizes that Clay's name is Clay, and Clay says that he heard all the jokes. She then tells him that she likes the name Clay. He says that he likes the name Hannah, and then moves in to kiss her, and they start making out on the bed. An upbeat song called 1,000 Times starts playing in the background, and Hannah's narration comes in again, where she says at that moment, everything was perfect. We then flash to Clay listening to the tapes as he seems surprised that this is what she thought while she was kissing him. Her narration continues that for the first time she can imagine a future where she could be happy, and then we see images of what that future would look like, with Clay and Hannah walking down the hallways of the school as a couple with their arms around each other as everyone else seems to respect the power of their relationship. Then we get a flash to another possible future where Clay and Hannah are sitting happily together as a couple as they talk to Hannah's mother, who seems really happy with them. In narration, Hannah tells Clay that she knows that Clay felt this too. We flash back to the bedroom where Hannah and Clay are still making out. Clay begins to take off his shirt, but he asks Hannah if this is okay, and she says that it's more than okay. So, this is one of the most powerful scenes put to screen, in my opinion. It really encapsulates the feeling of regret and speculating on what could have been. First off, it was extremely powerful to see Clay listening to the tapes and realize how Hannah felt during that moment, and to listen to her daydream about a possible future where they were happy together and everything was perfect. It must have been really extremely heartbreaking for him. And you can really put yourself in his mindset here. Now, the daydream isn't realistic, as when Hannah and Clay walk down the hallway, there's something almost regal to it, where all the other students seem to almost bow to them as they walk by. And of course, when Hannah and Clay hug cheerfully in front of Hannah's smiling mother, it's also very picturesque. However, daydreams never are realistic. They always portray an unrealistically perfect, picturesque future, and that's why this scene is so perfect. It's something that I, and I'm sure many others watching it, can personally relate to as who hasn't daydreamed of the perfect future, imagining themselves with someone where things in real life actually didn't work out. And in these daydreams, you're never arguing or fighting or paying the bills. Everything is always perfect, the way real life never is. So Clay and Hannah continue to make out, and in the narration, Hannah tells Clay that she wanted him to do everything that he was doing, so she doesn't know why her mind kept taking her to other places. That she thought of every other guy that mistreated her, and that they all became him. And we get a lot of visuals of people slut-shaming her, harassing her, and other bullying, including a snippet of Clay yelling at her that sometimes it's better to wait in response to a rumor that she fooled around with another guy. The flashes build in intensity until we finally see that she yells at Clay to stop and get off of her. He's confused and wondering if he hurt her, but he tries to continue kissing her, and she bats him away and tells him to stop. Finally, he gets up and tells her that he thought it was okay. She tells him to leave her alone. He approaches her and he tells her that he's sorry, but she says that he should just leave. In narration, we hear her explain that part of her didn't want him to leave, and another part of her never wanted to see him again. Clay asks if she's alright, and she tells him that she doesn't want him there and tells him to get out. When he asks again, she yells at him to get the fuck out, so he does. In narration, she says that he left because she told him to, and asks him why he had to leave, and says that it was the worst thing ever, and then things got worse. And we see Jessica and Justin enter the room making out while Hannah hides, which we know from the previous episode that will lead to her witnessing Bryce rape Jessica, followed by witnessing Sherry calls the crash that will kill Jeff. So this hits a really personal chord with me, as I experienced something similar when I was a teenager with a girl I loved, as she was also dealing with some trauma that confused her, feelings for me. And I was too young and inexperienced to understand or to deal with this. So this scene not only hits a personal chord with me, but also comes off as incredibly realistic as what can happen to those suffering from trauma, particularly involving romantic encounters, and how it can confuse their feelings for other people and make them feel undeserving of love or happiness. This comes off clearly when Hannah described part of her wanting Clay to stay and part of her never wanting to see him again, and how she yells at him to get out, but once he leaves, she feels abandoned and alone. A very powerful scene, which to me more accurately depicts what it's like to be a teenager suffering from trauma than any other film or show that I've seen. We then go back to the present with Clay listening to the tapes in the car. She addresses him directly, first by calling him Clay. Then she calls him Helmet, which is the cute nickname that she had for him, and he winces as if in pain when she calls him that. She then tells him that his name doesn't belong on this list, but that he needs to be there if she's going to tell her story. Because he isn't like every other guy. That he's good and decent and kind, and that she doesn't deserve to be with someone like him, and that she never would, because she would have ruined him. And she talks, as she talks, her voice cracks as if she's about to burst into tears, and Clay is vigorously shaking his head and crying, and he cries out no when she says that she doesn't deserve to be with someone like him. Clay then rips the headphones off of his head and obviously is in a lot of pain and anger until finally he screams, "God damn it," and then gets out of the car and rushes at Tony, yelling at him that he knew. Tony asks, what did he know? And Clay explains that he knew that it was his fault Hannah killed herself. Tony asks how he would know that, and Clay, still upset, yells that Clay had left the room, that she needed him, and he just walked away. Tony reassures him that he was doing what she told him to do, but he said that he ran because he was a coward who thought he did something wrong because he's a loser who doesn't know the first thing about girls. And after he left, Jessica got raped, then Sherry knocked over the stop sign, then Jeff died, and it all started with him. So this answers the season-long question most of the audience had been asking themselves since the first episode. What could Clay have done to be considered one of the reasons why Hannah killed herself? And the answer is, he isn't. But Hannah wanted to include him on the tapes because she needed him to be there to explain her story. And this also explains why throughout the first half of the season, the others who listened to the tapes before Clay were so concerned about how Clay was going to react to them, because they all had things to hide. But Clay was the only one who didn't. So they were worried he would expose them, and they, of course, knew how much he cared about Hannah. It also explains why Sherry was so suddenly attracted to Clay, because of the way Hannah described him as a good, decent person, and of course that she felt shame over what she did and was trying to show him that she was a good person before he listened to her tape. It also explains why the tapes were given to Clay, if they were also worried, because the person who gave the tapes to Clay was Sherry, the girl who felt the most shame and wanted his forgiveness. But of course, upon hearing this, Clay didn't see it that way, and instead jumps to blaming himself for not doing anything and thinking that it was his inaction that killed Hannah. Again, very powerful stuff. So Clay, in distress, climbs to the edge of a steep cliff, and Tony warns him that he needs to back away from it. But Clay asks why. Why shouldn't he just jump? To which Tony replies, somewhat mockingly, what, so you can be with Hannah again? To which Clay responds to Tony with a stiff F you. So Tony tries a different tact and tells him that there was nothing he could have done, but Clay insists that there was. But Tony insists that she was yelling at him to get out, but Clay insists that there's something he could have said, but Tony says there was absolutely nothing he could have said. So Tony starts taking on the role of Hannah and yelling at him to get the fuck out, and Clay responds the way he would have responded to Hannah by saying, not until you tell me what's wrong. We didn't go back into the bedroom where Hannah is yelling at Clay to get out, but this time Clay doesn't leave and says what he should have said. He tells her he'll leave, but he wants to know what's wrong first. She tells him that he doesn't want to be with her and asks if he knows what people will say. Clay says that he doesn't care, but Hannah remarks that it's easy for him because he's not the class slut. Clay tells her not to say that, but she says that everyone says it, and Clay says that he doesn't, but she corrects him that he did say it when he saw that picture. Clay then assures her that he was just jealous of Justin because he wished it was him, and that he was an asshole, and he apologizes. He then tells her that he loves her, that he'll never hurt her, and then insists that he's not leaving, not now, not ever. However, Hannah's response is to say, why didn't you say any of this to me when I was alive? Which takes Clay back a bit, but he then hugs Hannah and they cry together. But then we flash back to reality where Clay is on the cliff crying and Tony slowly guides him down. Clay tells Tony he killed Hannah, just like he said. But Tony clarifies that he said that they all killed Hannah. He asks him how he is supposed to live with that, and Tony answers, "Any way you can," and then guides him back to the car. So this is a scene that really, really resonates with me and drives home the theme of regret. And even as a viewer, it makes you weep for the romance that could have been but never was. It makes me think of like Star Trek or other science fiction where they can travel back in time and do things differently, set up things the way they should have happened, or correct mistakes. But those kind of stories are wish fulfillment, whereas this is cold reality, where there are no second chances, and what's done is done. Clay can try to imagine what he could have done or what he should have done differently and how that would have led to a better outcome, but it's just that, imaginings. And nothing can change the fact that Hannah's dead. In this scene, this is struck hardest when Hannah turns to him and says, "Why didn't you say this to me when I was alive?" When I first heard that line, it hit me like a blow to the chest. It was such a harsh way to splash reality on you that, again, I can fully relate to, as I'm sure many can, as we often imagine what we could have done differently or changed to have a better outcome. But the fact is, there is no changing the past. And that's a very cold, hard pill to swallow. And that's what makes this one of the most effective and emotional, powerful scenes ever put to screen, in my opinion. So throughout the episode, we also got a subplot that dealt with Justin and Jessica, as Jessica didn't remember the night she was raped and how Justin did nothing to stop it. And thus, Justin had been lying to her, telling her that nothing happened, and she's starting to suspect him. So she tries to trigger him by flirting with Bryce in front of him, which does really set him off. And she keeps demanding to know why, until finally he blurts out that Bryce had raped her. And so this makes her realize that what Hannah said on the tapes was actually true, which blows up her whole world. Also, we get to see Justin's home life, which is a wreck, as his mother's an alcoholic with an abusive boyfriend who threatens him physically, and he tries to go to friends for help, but no one but Alex is willing to help him. And then it ends with Jessica crying in bed as she fully realizes what had happened and feels betrayed by everyone that she thought were her friends. In later episodes, she tells Justin she never wants to see him again, and she tells Clay that he was the only one who tried to tell her the truth, and that she appreciates that. So while I don't find this subplot as interesting as the main plot, it's still effective in so much explaining there are no good guys or bad guys, because Justin did a terrible thing and did more terrible things to try to cover it up. But it was complicated, as he had a troubled life, comes from a terrible home, and the only one who supported him through this was Bryce. And without him, he's alone again. Yet his loyalty to Bryce it was preventing him from standing up to what he should have done, and this guilt was eating him up from the inside. On the other hand, Jessica is the true victim here and is not incorrect in feeling betrayed nor in cutting ties with Justin. But I love how the show explores the nuance of that instead of just portraying mustache-twirly villains. So we see Tony drive Clay home, and Tony makes him promise that he's not going to do anything stupid, and Clay, who looks defeated, makes that promise. When he enters the house, he finds his mother waiting for him, who explains to him that Hannah's parents rejected their offer of a plea deal and that he and his fellow students will have to testify. She then explains that she'll walk him through the procedure to tell him what questions to expect. She also explains that the questions will mostly be about his relationship with Hannah Baker, and the more they know beforehand, the better they can prepare him. He then promises her that he'll tell her everything, just not yet. So this is mostly setting up for what is to come, and also could hint at how Clay is keeping secrets from his mother, but it also speaks to how emotionally drained Clay was after having listened to his tape, and that recounting everything about it isn't something he's capable of reliving at this time, as he's completely emotionally drained, which does in fact make a lot of sense. So that's the episode. The one thing I will say is that this was one of the hardest YouTube videos I've ever had to make. I found it emotionally draining as well. This episode hits home in a very personal way, so I was extremely emotional while creating this video and having to relive events from my life, which I still find heartbreaking. However, that is precisely what makes this episode a masterpiece, that it can hit home so hard and strike such a personal chord. To me, this is hands down one of the best depictions of the ills of teenage love and the exploration of regret and dwelling on what could have been and what could have been done differently, and also, frankly, is one of the best tragic love stories ever told. Now, I was reading several negative reviews on this episode where the reviewer didn't buy it or wasn't emotionally affected by it, and I suspect that some watching this video may feel the same way, and that's fine. I understand that it isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea, but for me, this is quite personal. I still regard Season 1 of 13 Reasons Why as one of the best seasons of television ever, and as magnum opus as this episode, which is the show at its best, the show at its core, basically what made the show so great. And one of the stories that has had the biggest impact on me emotionally. So that's it for my A Perfect episode number 3. I shall be back next month with number 4 in my A Perfect episode series. In the meantime, you can check out my channel for more videos on other shows like Star Trek Discovery and all things Star Trek, as well as shows like The Expanse, Star Wars The Clone Wars, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.